So you can see that we are being joined by a few new friends here. Let me just quickly introduce them. They are all from different missions agencies. Mark is from Pioneers in Asia, National Director for Pioneers in Asia in Singapore. Simon is with the Wycliffe Global Alliance. I think you're overseeing the Asia Pacific area, is that right? And Diane is, well, she's using her husband's account now. Diane is joining us from Australia, and she's with SIM. And I believe you do regional development as well. Is that?
That's right.
All right, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I think the collective wisdom of the church will be best able to inform and guide the church for the way ahead. So let me invite you to just take a few moments to look at the questions that have been asked. And clearly there are some people have been writing short essays. We really appreciate the thought that you're putting into these matters. And so the way we're going to do it is this. I'm going to select the questions that we will spend time discussing. And then any panelist is welcome to just kick in and throw in a response or a thought, preferably within 1 minute, so that more people can share and we can cover more questions. Before we go to the very first question, which has received the most number of votes, I forgot to mention also that we will be joined by the National Director for the Singapore Center for Global Missions, Lawrence Koh, listening in all this while. He's my boss. And I think we are going to have quite a good panel here to respond to the questions. So let's jump into it, shall we? The first question that comes out is, many developed countries can access the gospel or the church virtually. However, how do we in the future reach out to poorer countries who may not have access to technology or the internet? They still remain hard to access, even when we have technology with us.
Maybe I'll have a go at this one. Yeah, I've been really pleased as this COVID situation broke out. Obviously, one of the first things we did was just touch base with all our missionaries and say, how are you coping? How's your work going? The first thing that pleased me was just this sense of selfless. There wasn't a hint of self-preservation. They said, we want to stay. And a lot of the churches said, we are happy for our workers to stay. And that was really just pleased. A lot of our pioneers workers just said, we will stay. And a lot of them were actually reporting increased opportunities, and a lot of them in places like this where they are in poor countries. A lot of our workers in India were also have this technology limitations. I think in the end, while we will use technology, I think we've had radio ministry, we've had mega voices, we've had all sorts of different technology over the years, and which we'll continue to use and maybe be increasingly dependent on. I think in the end, we will still want boots on the ground. We will still send people to be there long term. We will still work with local churches who have a presence there. I still think, I remember Paul, when Paul's writing to the Corinthians in his first letter, he's in his, he had so many times when he wrote from his captivity, from prison, and he wrote letters. But he also said, for this reason, I'm sending Timothy. I want him to remind you of the things that, you learned from me. There's always the need for the presence of the person. And so I think these are going to go hand in hand. We're going to increasingly use technology in a smarter way, but there's always going to be the need for people on the ground, boots on the ground, and maybe more limited short term. So the long termers will also, be there. But I think we can't replace people with technology, even in many of these cases, and especially the ones where the technology is not available.
Can I jump in on this as well? Yeah, having been working in Christian media for 7 years, we've always had this tagline that now everyone can be a broadcaster. So I think with this pandemic, we see this has been accelerated as churches are now all becoming content creators and broadcasters in their own right. And I think as Bishop Kwan Kim Sing mentioned in our dinner last year, there are 3 things that revolutionized missions over the last 200 years. One was the steamship, second was the airplane, and the third is the mobile phone. So I think these are things that will really help us accelerate the broadcast of Christian content. But just thinking here that perhaps this is where we got to think larger and collaborate, maybe an opportunity to collaborate. How can we then have a big vision and agenda and be able to fund the manufacture of cheaper, even mobile phones, and make it available to people all over Africa and all over Asia and the developing countries?
I think that this is the time when we're seeing some of the results of investing really heavily in relationships with churches. And even brand new churches, small churches in the tiny little communities where we would hardly imagine that the gospel has gone. We're now seeing the power of the gospel through a local presence. And we've just been really encouraged by seeing the compassionate care that is being displayed where we as foreigners may not be able to be there, but disciples are picking up on that and going out of their way in places like Guayaquil, in just so heavily impacted there. But it's the church in presence with the encouragement behind of others that is reaching out. And I think that's where we really have to see the currency of COVID and beyond is relationship.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I mean, now is really the time to really think big in terms of how to really access these people. Boots on the ground and by the proliferation of cheap, accessible technology. Let's go to the next question. How can missionaries become more self-sustaining rather than relying on foreign support? What are some of the platforms you have seen and proven successful? So this is an interesting question. It seems to presume that this is a situation where there are missionaries that are relying on support from people or churches outside of his or her home country.
I'd like to change that and say, rather than becoming self-sustainable, how can we as a community support each other? And I think we need to think about ways that we can effectively share. And that means at all levels. Perhaps our traditional models of financing, as Lawrence had mentioned earlier, are just not going to work. And let's be creative now to say, start again. What does it look like to share as a community? And that can be local as well as regional and global.
Yeah, can I answer this question as well? You know, sustainability program is a big agenda on OM because we are working in some of the places where very few churches have the means to support their people. So we help to create programs that will help them to be less dependent on outside sources. I can give you many examples, but I just go to one in Africa. This particular country, we bought a piece of land inexpensively, and then a German architect or German trained architect helped us design and build apartments. Then we rented it out, and the foreigners and others that saw the nice building, German standard, wanted to rent it and willing to pay more. So we were able to build several apartment buildings and rent it out to outsiders, and they in turn bring in the income. And so we are now sustaining the people. So when we started this country, we started as an OM field about 12, 13 years ago. And there were about, I think, less than 10 people who were with OM. And today we have about 100 plus people from that particular country, and most of their support was subsidized from the income that we receive from this sustainable program. Another one, and I seen it, shared it quite a few times, is my own little effort in China, that after the earthquake, we worked with a local group of people, and then we started a farming, community. And so even today, when there is a lockdown, this farm was able to provide the neighborhood, the town, with vegetables and some animals that they farm to the local community. So they are not dependent on outside sources, but rather they were able to produce food and income for themselves. We find this to be very effective. It gives dignity to the local people that they are not receiving funds from outside, and also it helps them to think missions in a different way. So these are just some of the programs that we were able to create. I think there was another question that I came across just now that talk about how can a person be a self-sustaining missionaries. And this is another program that we are introducing in OM as well. And that is that we are telling people, take your profession with you and go serve the Lord. If God made you to be a carpenter, then work as a carpenter. If God makes you to be, a teacher, then go teach. And then when you teach in a particular setting where you are, then you live for Jesus, and then your life in itself is a missionary life that will draw people to Christ. So you can go there with your profession as an engineer, doctor, dentist, teacher, business people, and let God use you and the way He wired you, you produce for Him. And that way you are self-sustaining. And we have created programs that way and see successful result from the Gulf and the Middle East.
I think the question of self-sustainability is by no means new. Our mission organizations and churches have been wrestling with this for decades. It's probably one of the 3 top questions we're always wrestling with the moment we start to engage with in a cross-cultural sense. And maybe in the past it has been still relatively convenient for those from the poorer countries to still rely upon funds from the West because the mechanism of it is available. I'm wondering whether in the category of what is God doing here, whether this is part of what is God is doing to push some parts of the global church to grow up and be the senders, the goers, the givers. And some of us in the West who have largely had a ministry of giving funds, which I think there's a wonderful biblical basis for being generous and to give. But it's always been easier to just raise some money from overseas than to get your church to tithe. The exchange rate has, always been easier. In India, I found it time and time again. And while I don't think we do want to say this should not be a ministry, because biblically we see Paul working on tents and we see Paul taking up collections. Both are equally biblical. But at the same time, I think this may be an opportunity for us to say, how can some of our ministries grow up and start to take their place on the global stage? We've talked about the Global South rising for decades. Maybe this is the impetus to actually, force some innovation and some self-reliance. So I don't know, maybe this is what God might do in this season.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting question because it's a question that has to involve the church, has to involve the local community and the building of those relationships and partnerships. When you talk about the community, we cannot quickly default to the global community and to write that letter to that well-resourced organization because it's a quicker fix. And, whereas to build those relationships and those ties locally, it takes time. I recall one of our organizations in Indonesia, when they had the opportunity to raise funds for the publication of free Bibles. The West were just coming in and said that, yeah, we can fund it and we can just write you the check. But the local organization preferred to say that, no, thank you very much. We like to raise this locally. We like the local church and the local Christians to take ownership of that. It took them a much longer time, versus just receiving a check that was, offered. But the end result was to see so many people, and they chose not just to go to the rich Christians in Indonesia, but they went to the schools. So the targeted Christian youths. At the end of the day, the Christian youths were involved and their faith was increased. And it was such a boost to their faith when finally the amount that was collected miraculously was the amount they needed in rupiah terms. So you can imagine what kind of miracle that is. So the impact is not just the making of the funds available to run the project, but the impact is on the whole psyche, the whole paradigm that this is a work that God has called us to. And what Lawrence talked about just now, if future short-term missions are going to be done more and more by the local churches, you know, in the near culture, same culture, we need to involve the church. And so that we'll be seen less and less of just a local body of a foreign organization, you know.
Thanks. I think let's move on to the next question, which seems quite relevant for a time when we see a lot of trauma arising from a pandemic and the economic hardship that comes along with that and so on. Would you have any comments to make on the issue of member care during this period? Are you seeing signs of you know, fresh new signs of trauma or new challenges or new opportunities in caring for members? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Let me start off by answering this question, because we are right now in the midst of doing this. When we got news that the borders have been locked down, closed, and all this, the first thing we did was we sent out a survey among the OM workers around the world and find out who are impacted economically by the COVID-19. So then we launched 2 sets of fundraising. One externally, we raised funds from our friends and outside people, and then one we raised funds from within the organizations, all to give to help people who are economically or who sustain economical loss resulting from COVID-19. And we are not just helping the OM people, but we are helping the OM people who are helping other people. For example, one story here from Myanmar. When I saw the request came in from this person in Myanmar, I thought it was a little bit high for a single person. And then I went into a box where they gave the reason. And the reason was that he had been working with a family for many years and building a strong relationship, telling about the love of Christ and the gospel. And then this man, the head of his household, have lost his job because of COVID-19. And then he couldn't pay his rent. So him and his family have nowhere to live. So he came to this person and said, could we stay in your house? And this person has a big farm. So he said, sure, you can stay in my farm. But in a Myanmar culture, it also means feeding these people. So he was asking for funds that will help him so that he can also feed the people that he's working with. And thank God, through our fundraising effort, we managed to have enough funds to help our people, at least at this phase. If we don't know how long it will go, but we take it a step at a time. So raising funds from external sources and from internal family members to able to help care for our own people. We also established a hotline where they can call in and ask for help. And our priorities right now is to make sure that the welfare of every worker is taken care of. Because if they are not able to sustain their health, they cannot reach out to the people that they care for and work with. Yeah, so this is just some of the things that we're doing. And but I like to hear more from other organizations, what they're doing, because it's always good to learn from others.
Just a couple of additional things to that. We've certainly had similar experiences, but being very intentional about providing counselling services online with people, and doing that through the pastoral care. Those of us who are in senior leadership, often people don't want to share with us, but using our pastors, our member care people, that's been very helpful. Providing ongoing training. This is a time where there are many people, they are anxious, they are perhaps are locked in and don't have things to do, reduced opportunities to get out and about, but it's a time for training and just letting people know what resources, lots of online free stuff that has been really helpful for our people keeping focused. But I'm also aware that some of our people, we've got a small number, thankfully, but who have been infected themselves with COVID. coming in contact as they've been relationally caring for others, as they've been out there working with their community. And we've seen just a tremendous outpouring of prayer. And perhaps I'd just like to highlight that, not only for our agencies internally, but to invite our churches to pray through this time. And we've set up some very specific times, 10 days of prayer. We've just begun today, but regional prayer groups. So we're praying around the globe 24/7. I think prayer is an area that we can really concentrate to care for our people, but also to listen to the Lord. What is He asking us to do? And what directions, what things must we change? That is critical.
We've got a very decentralized organization, so a lot of the care doesn't come just from the base, but from the teams themselves. And so we've been really encouraged as we connect with team leaders and area leaders to think about the welfare of our members. We're seeing this network, caring for the members. It comes from the local church, it comes from their supporters, it comes from their local teams. And so as we have connected with the local members, one of the encouraging things to me is that a lot of the work that we've been putting into over the years of how do we develop resilient missionaries for times like this. I haven't heard too many stories of missionaries saying, gee, I feel as if I'm in a terrible crisis. We have offered the counseling, the member care specialists on the field, a lot of the networks, but by and large, it's just been a pleasing thing for me to hear from the missionaries to say, God is providing. I'm even seeing Him work miraculously to provide visas, in this time. I'm seeing Him miraculously open doors for long-term missionary. One of the things that is clear in this time is I think there is a need for just a self-care, but I think a lot of the missionaries are saying the purposes of God are being accelerated in this time. And, aid and relief work, those who are involved in aid and relief work are just exploding in their ministry, new doors opening to communities, and others are also using the online mechanism. So I think while member care is one of the things that is obviously a high priority for many of our agencies and should be necessarily so in churches, I've actually just been really pleased that we haven't yet seen the crisis in member care yet hit us. I'm wondering whether there'll be another wave as the financial part hits, and maybe some of the personal finances of the members hit, but that'll be maybe something that we're going to have to monitor and help them with in the future.
Okay, I'm going to get to the next question now, and I'm mindful that amongst our audience we have quite a number of young people who are either already involved in missions or are seriously contemplating being involved in long-term missions. The question is basically, do you have any advice to young people who are thinking of becoming long-term missionaries since times are so different now?
Okay, maybe I'll just start by saying a couple of things from a historical perspective. Yeah? I think when we look at 2,000 years of our church history, and specifically over the last 200 years of our Protestant missions history, you find that there will always be challenges in different periods of life, in history, but you find that somehow or another God always raises up not only those who will answer the missionary call, but also the opportunities for exploration, whether it is business or otherwise. So, for example, I think Diane could vouch for that. Captain Cook sailing all the way to Australia inspired William Carey, to consider the fate of the heathens around the world. So I think this is where I would challenge young people, to see that whenever there are economic opportunities, there are technological or whatever global opportunities, God will raise up people with that sense, with adventure, with a sense of calling in their lives to want to serve His kingdom purpose. And perhaps there will be some with a religious bent that will be able to offer themselves for the sake of missionary calling. So I'm very optimistic that in every season, it is an opportunity for the church to raise up younger missionaries.
I like your answer, Lawrence. I think history is a wonderful mirror for what we're doing now. And one of the things that you don't find, maybe we write about our heroes rather than the others, but one thing that history does inspire me is that there's not a lot of hint of self-preservation in a lot of the missionary stories. Everything from the first century Christians who ministered in the times of the plagues in Rome. You know, in the 200s, you know, they were talking about a plague in Rome where allegedly 5,000 people were dying in Rome per day. The Christians embraced that. They died actually in their service, and they were seen as martyrs as they died in this thing. A lot of the missionaries stories we talk about of, you know, of going with your coffins. Maybe we have become really risk averse in our Western world, at least. And one of the things that inspires me as I see missionaries who are coming from the global South is they don't have the same risk aversion that we do. They are saying, send me to the hard places. They're not saying, you know, oh, gee, where's my insurance and where's my big budget? And maybe this is where we can learn from our brothers and sisters in the global South, and this COVID situation will be our tutor, to say, yes, we have to care for each other. Yes, we have to, you know, take precautions, and we don't want to lose our life, not necessarily, but self-preservation is not the first prerequisite for a missionary. And maybe our theology of risk and suffering will be challenged in this time as we consider, you know, the assumption is, should we be sending long-term? Yes, we should be sending short-term and long-term, because there is still a task to be done. And the risk of getting sick is not the worst thing in the world for us as Christians. You know, there's an eternal reward for us, and we have wonderful medical science to back us up as well.
Can I just add on to what you've just said? I think this whole pandemic might actually help us to accelerate our thinking about the future of work. You know, we've been talking about the future of work that will be disrupted by all these issues in global trade and economics and all that. But perhaps this could be a good time where the younger generation will be able to ride on this new future of work that's here, you know, with technology and all that, and develop themselves to become micro entrepreneurs that will become self-sustainable and allow them not to just wear the badge of a missionary. In fact, I feel that the word missionary that appeals to maybe 5% of the church that has a special calling for the religious work may have to, you know, rethink that and try and see how we can mobilize the 95% of the church that's going to go and impact the rest of the world. Yeah, and perhaps the future of work is going to take us there.
So the short answer to the young people who are thinking, well, just go. God will be with you. But to help them along, it would really help, it seems, if the churches and agencies are open to getting disrupted and to presenting fresh paradigms for missions. And of course, I'm riffing from partly from Xiang Bin's question, and also from another question where someone asked what churches should be prioritizing and how mission agencies should be investing to leverage on the current disruption. Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But Xiang Bin was wondering aloud, for example, that maybe we need to revert to an old paradigm, not a new paradigm, but it's actually a paradigm that had been there for a long time in terms of the way we do long-term missions. But more broadly, the question is about, disruption, the realities of disruption in our time, and how you think mission agencies and churches should leverage that. Specifically for, I guess, global missions, and more specifically about reaching the unreached.
I think if you look at the history, and we talk about history of even of modern missions, we do have to remember that the world then and the world today is different. And therefore, as we talk about encouraging young people and the church to be involved in missions, to mobilize and to send, we need to be thinking of the current challenge and the challenges in the future, and then to be prepared to look at what are the things which are really the core, and what are the things that we are willing to change. God's work needs to be done. The unreached people needs Christ, but the mission agency does not need to retain all of its special characteristics that were there when they were incepted, you know, and therefore the openness and to think about the current day challenges. How do we go? Because one of the challenges is not just the case of future pandemics and so on, but as someone has mentioned, I think Lawrence, that the fact that we wear the badge of the missions agency itself is a problem in many parts of the world. And we need to collaborate to think together, maybe think along what Brother Lawrence Tong has mentioned just now. What is this world look like if all the missions agencies have no egos and no logos, and find ways to collaborate and work together in the kingdom?
I'm also aware that many mission initiatives have been taken by young people. Being courageous, just doing it. And we sit here older, feeling more experienced, and that can be a barrier. What would it look like for our mission agencies to bless our young people and say, try something, we have no idea if it's going to work, but we want to support you and we want to collaborate between us as agencies, as churches, and I'm seeing that kind of collaborative space growing, and I think it's really exciting. And the challenge for us to be willing as leaders to step back and empower our younger people to say, in your 20s, SIM was formed, grew out of 20-year-olds. And what would it look like for our 20-year-olds now to be leading us in mission? I'd love to see that from the Church of Singapore.
I like that.
I like
Diane.
that. I like that, Diane. It resonates well with me. You know, yeah, over the years, you know, the mandate of God hasn't changed. The calling of God hasn't changed. But the approach to mission and the methods of mission have changed and evolved over the years. And this may be an opportunity now to rethink and see how, you know, we can redo missions. And I like the idea. We are losing out on the younger generations if we do not allow them to risk for God, to take risks for God. And you know, as you said, SIM was started by a 20-year-old. OM was started by missions, by teenagers. And today we look at teenagers and 20-year-old and we wonder if they can do the job. And we need to change our mindset as well and create space for those people. What I'm hearing from our young people is that they are asking for impact. They don't want title, they don't want positions, they're not even looking for a paid job. They just wanted to be given the opportunity to make an impact in the kingdom of God. And we need to give it to them.
Amen.
Maybe what this season's, sorry, Lawrence, you go.
Okay, no, I just want to affirm that. And I think Zuwan and I, we always talk about this because Zuwan is mentoring a lot of millennials. But I always challenge these young people that I also work with that actually, like they say in football, if you are good enough, you're old enough, you know, so step up to the plate and play the game.
I was just going to say, maybe what this season is teaching us is that methods are actually disposable. We're going to discard methods that are not going to work in this new season. And in every generation, the issue has never been what is the smartest method. It's always been where are the people who will go.
That's right.
And if we have young people, old people, sort of retirees, any people who will stand say, I want to go, then the rest is actually the easy part. You know, getting there and they're training them and preparing them. What we actually see is the largest barrier is the global church that is settled is spending most of its resources on itself, which is seen, you know, I don't feel called to go. Now, going doesn't mean going overseas. Going says going to the harvest. And I think it's a posture of our heart that we need. It's no longer about going overseas now because we can't get on planes. But the question is, am I engaged in God's mission in my world? What is God? What does obedience look like to me? Is it reaching to my HDB flat neighbor? Is it going across the causeway somewhere, or is it going overseas? And I think methods are disposable. but we long for young people, a whole new generation of people who'll put up their hand and say, look, send me and I'll go anywhere you want me to go, Lord. And I think then the rest is easy.
Well, I pray that this COVID-19 situation will be no obstacle for the whole fresh new generation of people getting involved. Now we're going to still give a bit more time to address and tackle some questions. But if you have been listening in and finding that, okay, I need to go to bed, or I need to attend to something else, please feel free to just leave the webinar. But if you will, may I request you before you leave to drop a note of encouragement to all our panelists, and maybe especially for Lawrence Tong for his sharing. And you can just simply do that by typing a note in the chat. And we will try to save all this and send it to everyone who's participating in this panel. So thanks very much. But for the rest of us, if you wish to stay on a little bit longer, you're most welcome to do so. I think we'll try to cover a few more questions. And yeah, let's just keep going, okay? Because they got lots of good stuff going on here. So somebody just asked that, wow, well, with the end of short-term missions, how do you now expose people to missions as they contemplate long-term missions, for example? How do we expose people to the harvest field, to the needs out there, and to what's involved, short of actually going on a long-term mission trip?
Maybe I'll just jump in. And, you know, just to share on a personal note, the Lord has given me a heart for China for a long time, since I was, before I joined the university, right? But it took me easily another 10 years before I set my foot in China proper. You know, but all the 15 years prior to that, I had been preparing myself for missions in China. So getting a university education that is China focused, getting a theological training, and pastoring in the church, because that is a very good training for the mission field. So to care about souls and learning how to reach out to from the cradle to the grave, you know, and all that. So, but so even if there is a little setback right now, you may not be able to get into the field immediately, there's still a lot of opportunities for you to train locally. Prepare yourself.
I would encourage people to get to know their neighbors who are not like them, to get to know people who are from different cultural backgrounds, different generations, and start learning what it is just to simply share your lives and share the gospel with people that way. That is one of the best skills that we take into mission, is building relationships and sharing the good news of Jesus through our everyday life. That, to be intentional about that right now, is one of the really important things I think we can be all doing.
And I've encountered so many people who have so-called received their call or the interest in missions through attending the Kairos courses, the perspectives, and just that understanding from scripture to see the heart of God from Psalm 67 and see the whole thread of God's heart for the nations. I think that all these things are things that we can do right now and right here without going for that short term. Yeah.
Yeah, I also see there's a lot of materials online, a lot of videos, a lot of presentations from different mission agencies that people can go into. There's a whole, data load of resources, and people can be educated and understand about the needs of all these different places. I mean, I don't think this is a demise of short-term mission. Maybe it's the end of the way we understand what short-term mission is, but there are new ways of doing short-term missions. And then when all this thing pass over, God will provide another way for people to go get involved, exposed, educated, connected, and then that may be, the catalyst for them to go into full-time ministry.
There will be a day again that we can, can you still hear? I think this thing will pass. There will be a day where we can start to travel again.
Yeah.
But like Lawrence and Diane said before, I think getting involved locally is really God uses a moving ship. If we're saying, God, please send me, and we're not serving in our local church, then we don't have momentum in our lives. We're not getting experience working in a team. We're not developing evangelism skills in our own culture. So how do we evangelize in another culture? I think the first thing we always look for in a long-term missionary is a track record of serving in their local church effectively. And then you can put on the cross-cultural skills. So if you haven't got that, serve in your local church. If you're already serving in a local church, do what Diane says, go to your neighbors who are cross-cultural and try doing it cross-culturally. And then you'll be qualified to say, maybe God will send me to another country. I think that's the path of many of the effective missionaries that I've seen.
Let's go to the next question here. Ooh, this sounds interesting. We've been talking about kingdom collaboration and how the cost of missions will go up and how they may be. And the question seems to presume that there's going to be pressure on smaller missions organizations to fold or to be absorbed or restructured in some way. So the question here is not the future of global missions, but the future of missions agencies or missions organizations. Do you think that it's timely for a dialogue to be organized for mission organizations to actively discuss this and explore this avenue of kingdom collaboration?
Well, I work at the area level, but I'm happy to say that in Singapore, there is the Fellowship of the Mission Organizations in Singapore, FORMOS, and I think this is already happening in some sense for a number of years when the leaders come together and they collaborate and they talked about a variety of issues. Yeah. So just like to say that some forms of this are already happening, but we need to look at what are the kind of things that are quite urgent for us to discuss now. Yeah.
The question has an inherent, focus on organizations, and I'm a little bit less pastoral in such areas. I feel as if you look at history, God has no obligation to keep every organization going. The ones which become old wineskins that should be discarded. And I think this is a challenge for every church and mission agency and with a Christian organization to actually redefine ourselves and say, are we relevant? If it's God, if we're just working with old methods and old paradigms, well, it's okay that some organizations will close and become irrelevant in these new paradigms. So the challenge is to us, whether we're a church or mission organization, to say, what is God doing here? This is the God question. Yeah, we don't have crystal balls. We're all waiting. There's a bit of a liminal state where we're just waiting to see what happens. But I think this is a pause to say, how do I prepare my heart to move when God starts to open doors again? There's a sort of almost a pregnant pause that we're all stuck in our houses and we can't do all the busyness of activity. I think it's a wonderful season to just open our hearts to God. And but the other thing that I'm encouraged by is what Simon just said. There is a lot of dialogue between the organizations going on to say, how do we do this together? How do we serve each other? How can we share what we've got? Our boundaries between our organization need to be a lot more porous so that things can flow in and out much more readily, rather than being territorial and saying this is my turf. And I think this is one of the wonderful things I've actually seen in the COVID season. There's a lot of sharing going on, which has encouraged me.
And I would agree too, Mark. I've seen perhaps an acceleration of what we're seeing as some early steps of collaboration, particularly in our teams out there. We've talked about some of the local things in Singapore, but out there, that's also happening with different organizations, different churches coming together and saying, what is it can do together in this community? It's an expression of unity. And I think that's a really critical piece. And also the diversity as we come together in dialogue, that challenges each of us to learn and grow and to figure out what things need to be knocked off or reshaped, even in organizations that may appear to be able to push through this COVID situation. We all need to be challenged by God to be this beyond.
Yeah, I would agree, Diane, with you and also Mark and others who mentioned. I think at the grassroots level, at the field level, especially when I was working in China, I saw there is a lot of collaborations between different missionaries. And so that is taking place. And I also know that on the international leaders level, they are meeting together regularly. I meet with a group of people. I think many of your leaders are there, and regularly talking about how we can find ways to cooperate. I think the big need for us mission agencies as well is to recognize the strength of other agencies, and we can work together, and then together, we are a complete body where the collective IQ and collective data and collective network will serve the kingdom in a more efficient way. I also think that about mission organizations, I think mission organizations serves the purpose of God, and when they are no longer serving the purpose, it is God's prerogative to move them on. And we just have to live with that reality that we don't own the organization. We're simply steward of the organization. It belongs to Christ.
Amen. I would say that that same idea applies to all churches or any form of organization or structure that the people of God inhabit to be and do what God calls of the church. So it's not just for mission agencies, but for every single structure that together comprises the church. But I think thank you so much everyone for this very engaging talk, and thanks for really sharing from your heart. We don't often get such platforms to talk openly about missions related stuff, and so we really hope that this conversation will continue. And here, those of us here at SCGM will also be trying to put our heads together to think about how that can work out, especially as we explore fresh paradigms and expressions in this time of disruption. So thank you very much, Lawrence Tong. Thank you, Mark, and Diane, and Simon. Thanks, Lawrence Ko. So I need to address you by your last name so that you know who I'm referring to. But I think can we invite everyone to just wherever you are seated or standing to just close in prayer and pray to the Lord of the harvest on behalf of all the people of God and on all the world and of creation that needs the redemption of God. And I would love to invite Lawrence Tong or Lawrence Ko each to just say a prayer to close us, if that would be great.